Hi there, my name is Matt Hanlon. I'm a longtime software developer and I've worked on a number of different platforms and in a variety of environments. And today we're going to be looking at making the Mac feel more like home. When we come from another platform, there's always that uncanny valley where things don't behave quite the way we expect them to. So I'm going to walk through a few things that will help you feel more at home, understand the translation between the two different platforms, and then also show you some of your old favorites, and then also some other tools that we can use to make the Mac more like where we've come from. Okay, so first thing I want to show you is a set of resources available from support at Apple. This is a list of key terms that you'd be familiar with on Windows and how they translate to the Mac. So we're talking about things like the Alt key and Option key, a lot of the function keys, Alt Tab, Cortana versus Siri, and loads more. So this is probably the first resource I'd stop at, what's it called on my Mac, just to feel a little bit more at home. There's also a resource on Mac tips for Windows switchers. We've been through a lot of these in the early videos, and of course we'll be covering some in the videos coming up. But these will just help you figure out how to get common tasks done without driving yourself crazy, because they're all spelled out here. Lastly, Windows keys on a Mac keyboard, how they're going to translate between the two. If you're used to working on a Windows keyboard and you're bringing it over to work on the Mac, what keys map to which corresponding Mac keys. So all good resources to check out. And lastly, to make yourself feel really at home, there is the Windows Migration Assistant. So if you're wanting to bring over a whole bunch of files from your Windows machine, if that's where you're coming from, you could take a look at this resource here. That should get you well underway, bringing all your files over, making you feel like you're in your new home. So that's the first resource I've got for you. Now we're going to start to dive into some of the things that will address maybe minor irritations you might have coming over, or major irritations. Very first thing is we're going to talk a lot today about window management, because I know that is a major sore point for a lot of people. I'm going to go have a look in system settings, where we've been hanging out a lot this series. And in desktop and dock, we're going to find one that's maybe not from home, but it's going to maybe help us get a few things done quickly. In desktop and dock, if we go all the way down to the bottom, there's a button here called Hot Corners. We're going to see something like this when we talk about some third-party apps later. This is really handy if you want to start screensavers or lock your machine as you walk away. We'll also talk about some cool functionality with the Apple Watch that you can use in a future episode. But for example, right now, Quick Note is set to come up when I go to that lower right-hand corner. So if I go down there, it brings up the Excellent Notes application. I use this for a lot of my features and keeping all my apps organized and that kind of thing. The other common complaint I'll hear is about input sources. If I'm using a variety of keyboards, or if I'm trying to type in Cyrillic as well as English and Arabic and you name it, I need to change my input sources. Now, I showed you in an earlier video how we can add input sources. If we go up to this menu item here, I can open keyboard settings. I'm going to close that down, and I'll just go down and open it myself. In here, I can choose to edit my input sources. This is where I've got Irish, US, and Italian. I could add something like Arabic here. And you can see that we have a few options. If I check this box, macOS will switch to the appropriate input source. So if I'm working in a document where I've been writing in Arabic, it'll switch to the Arabic keyboard. If I'm writing in Italian, it'll switch to my Italian keyboard. And we've also got some shortcuts that will let us cycle through those quickly. And I can find those in keyboard shortcuts. input sources, and it's control space. So if I hold control space, if I hold it down, I'll see a list of all of them. And as I hit the space bar while I'm holding down the control key, I can cycle through all my different keyboards. So that might be a handy way to replicate that functionality you might have been comfortable with, where your keyboard switches to Cyrillic or Arabic or English, depending on what you're working in. We can emulate that same thing with the Mac. And the last thing that I know drives a lot of people crazy is mouse acceleration. And we can turn that off. If we go to our mouse settings, there's an advanced button. And there's one preference in there, and that's to turn on or off pointer acceleration. So if you're not a big fan of how pointer acceleration works with the Mac, you can just turn that off and you're good to go. So that's helping you get set up with a few comforts from home, maybe replace some things that you thought were missing. The next thing I want to show you is some of the window tiling behavior. So I'm going to close out settings. We're not using that anymore. Now, if I have a few documents open, and I'll grab a couple of my other text edit documents, things can get crowded very quickly. On Windows, you might be very quickly snapping items to a grid and laying things out really well so that you can see everything, especially if you have some nice, beautiful, big monitors. It's a little bit different on the Mac. So if I mouse over the maximize button, I can see a few different options for moving this window around the screen. Now this is the latest version of macOS, Sequoia, and I can choose to have it fill and arrange things. It'll grab a few different windows to try to lay them out. And I can also use this tiling behavior that's been around for a while in macOS, where I can say, actually, I'd like to show this on the left of the screen, this app crash sample, and maybe this as well. I might use this if I've got a code file open and I'm trying to diagnose where my app crashed and I'm reading through the source. I might bring them up side by side just so that I can kind of analyze them isolated all on their own. If I have a look with mission control, which we've seen before, and I swipe up with 3 fingers, I can see that I've actually created a new desktop with just those 2 apps in them. And I can easily bounce to my other desktops. So that tiling behavior is really good if we just want to focus with 2 apps side by side in a split view. And in the latest version of macOS, now if I grab my text edit document and I bring it to the side, I'll get a highlighted box of where that's going to end up. So we do have some of that snap to drag behavior. If I drag it to the top, it'll offer me the full screen. Sometimes. If I drag it to the side, now if I leave it there too long, I'm going to jump over to another desktop. But this is a way to maybe get some of that snapping behavior they had before. It's not quite as slick maybe as Windows just yet, but it's getting there. There's definitely a big push to make that a bit more competitive there. If I go up to the window menu on most apps, I'm going to find full screen tile, and this is where I can choose to have it on the left side of the screen or the right side, and I can bring up the Finder maybe. If I want to get out of this, I can always just hit the minimize button. You'll see that changes and it points inwards when I mouse over it when it's full screen. I can also, in addition to full screen tiling, I can use this new move and resize behavior where I can fling it around the screen, and it's not just a half a screen or the top half of the screen. We can actually start to get a little bit more sophisticated options here. Top left, top right, left and right. We can do quarters. I don't have enough windows open on this particular screen. And then we also have the option to return to previous size. So those are some of the new features in the latest version of macOS. But you might still be saying, this isn't enough. I want more. I want loads more. Well, there's a third-party app that you can use to get that snap to window behavior called Rectangle. And the third-party apps I'm going to talk about today are all open source, so you can go check the source out. The second one that I'm going to talk about you can pay for, but you can also install it with Homebrew. So I'm going to swipe over, and this is the first app we're going to talk about, is Rectangle. So I have this installed already. It's basically just a window manager for macOS. So if I bring up Spotlight, and I'm going to type in Rectangle app, now nothing appears to happen, nothing launched. And what's happened is, this is what's appeared. So this is Rectangle. It's UI, and that's it. So we've got the ability to do center half. I'm resizing VS Code. In fact, if I bring over a couple more windows here, maybe I'll minimize a few of these and we'll make it a little bit more interesting. Minimize, not maximize. So now if I go to Rectangle, I can say we can almost maximize VS Code. We can move things to the last fourth. And if I go to settings, you can see that I've got a whole bunch of shortcuts, so I can do these things very quickly. So if I cycle through the windows, and I can do that with Command tick, will cycle me through windows in an app. I can very quickly use those shortcuts to reposition my windows. You'll see there's also some of that hot corners behavior that I showed you that's built into macOS already. It's a really handy little app that might be that missing piece for window management that you were missing out on in your move from Windows over to macOS. Now, the other thing that I've heard a lot of people mention is missing for them is a more robust clipboard manager. We have a pretty robust clipboard manager in macOS. There's a thing called Universal Clipboard, where if you have the same Apple ID on your iPhone or your iPad or multiple iPads and your Mac, copying and pasting will copy and paste around the whole series of devices, which can be really handy if you're working on your phone and you want to continue working on your laptop. It's really handy to have that universal clipboard. But we do have the danger of copying something and it stomps all over whatever was in the pasteboard up to that point. So if that is the case, we want something a little bit more powerful than what we're talking about here, I can go over and have a look at Mackie. So this is the GitHub page for it. It's open source, as I mentioned. But you can also go download it from Mackie.app or from the App Store. And we'll talk about why you would get something from the App Store and what happens when you don't get it from the App Store, what things you might see in the next chapter. So if I have a look at, if I'm working in notes, and if I'm going to minimize this, I'm going to work on it in a bit of clutter here, and I'm going to access Mackie just by typing in Mackie. I can also see that it's running up there in the system bar with this icon here, so I can invoke it the same way by just tapping on that icon. Now, if I want to copy a file, I'm actually going to, let's copy this one here. So we'll just select that. I'm going to create a new note and paste that file in there. So not only do I get images, I also get text. So imagine I'm trying to explain to someone, let's set up a web.py web server. I don't know why I'm doing that with this image. But there, I've just pasted that. So I get a lot more robust clipboard history with Mackie than with my built-in macOS clipboard. And there are ways to configure that as well to satisfy all your needs in terms of your clipboard and sharing. And you can check out the source code if you like. And you can throw some money if you want to support an independent developer. I think it's a great little app that covers a missing hole in the feature set. Okay, so that's getting you settled, again, particularly with Windows management and a few of the things that may just not feel quite right when you're working on the Mac. Of course, we have loads of text editors. I've been using VS Code as my Windows example, popping that around the screen. Let's make that almost maximized now. So if you've been using VS Code and you're writing Python code or C#, there's loads of extensions to load here, including Swift ones. So if this is your scene, VS Code will take care of all your coding needs. Now it doesn't stop there. That's of course not the only IDE we have on the platform. We've got things like IntelliJ, we've got Eclipse as well. In fact, if I go to my home directory here, I've got an Eclipse folder. I can open that up. That'll have a lot of the things you know and love, or at least know and tolerate about Eclipse and IntelliJ. We can download things like PyCharm as well from JetBrains. The last piece of the puzzle, for me anyway, is often I'll be doing a bit of database work. I also have things like Postgres, MySQL. So I can run my own Postgres server here from the Mac itself, not inside Docker. I can also run it inside Docker. And I'm going to show you in the command line chapter how to run a lot of this stuff the way you might be familiar running it from the command line and installing things like the Postgres server. Because while it's great that we have these graphical user interfaces for a lot of these tools, oftentimes we don't really need them and they might just get in the way. So when we need to drop to the command line, we still can. As I said, we'll be talking about the command line, and we'll be going over some of the safety and security things that you might run into when you're working with a Mac that maybe you haven't run into on previous platforms. It's all in the service of trying to get you productive as fast as possible and as comfortable as possible. So we'll see you in the next video.